All right, heading out right now to see The Eternals. Now, made some mistakes, saw a few headlines of reviews, very mixed. But you know what the good news about them being very mixed reviews is? It's really lowered my expectations. I'm really hoping that helps me enjoy this movie more. Really, I mean, I don't go to see a movie hoping it's bad. I'm hoping it's good. So let's check it out. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler-free review for Eternals. So was this a good movie? Meh. I mean, seriously, that was my exact reaction walking out of the theater. But when I say meh, that's not me saying, it's a terrible movie, it's awful, it's not worth your time to see it. No, it wasn't a bad movie, but I'm gonna give it a C+. It really is like the definition of completely average for me. This was not an exceptional MCU film. It did not stand out as one of the best, but it definitely wasn't bland or vanilla and one of the worst. Like, it definitely tried to do something different than the rest of the MCU movies, and it definitely tried to be a little bit more unique, and I did appreciate that. So it tried to break the typical MCU formula that we all already know. Now, I like the MCU formula quite a bit, and I respect that this one tried to do something different. Because, I mean, come on, we've had it for 20 some odd movies now. So yeah, I respect that this one is trying to do something different. It's trying to do something new. It's trying to bring us in a new direction. So I do have a lot of respect for Eternals. I have a lot of respect for what it attempted to do. And I really did enjoy the visuals. In some ways, I couldn't help it. I was kind of going into this with a comparison to Dune. Because this one, not that I'm actually literally comparing it to the movie Dune, couldn't be more different. I will say this. Dune has a slow pace, and it was 2.5 hours, and I wanted more. This has a slow pace, and it was about 2.5 hours, and it felt like longer, and I was kind of excited when it was over. And possibly that comparison comes because the MCU has a certain flavor, it has a certain feel, and this one is kind of moving against that feel and doing, not against, but you know what I mean. It's doing something different than that typical Marvel feel, and so probably consciously or subconsciously, I'm comparing this pacing of this film to other MCU films, so that comparison is probably there, which might be a little bit of an unfair comparison, but at the same time, this is an MCU film, and so, perhaps that's where my mind is at. It's expecting a certain flavor, and this was a completely different flavor. Now, I do wonder what I would think if I saw this movie again, now that all my expectations are in the right place. I had low expectations for this movie, and I walked out going, not bad. Would it be different now, knowing what to expect? I don't know. I've only seen it once, and I really don't need to see it again until it comes out on Disney+. That's honestly how I feel about it. So it is going to get a second view from me, but I'm in no hurry to get there. Now, one of the things I did appreciate about this movie is I did like its epic scope. So it really tried to cover a lot of stuff. One of the things that I did like is I feel like the explanation for why they haven't gotten involved in humanity all of this time was pretty well explored in this movie. And you get the tip of the iceberg in the trailer.
Why didn't you guys help fight Thanos?
We were instructed not to interfere in any human conflicts unless deviants are involved.
By who?
That is just the tip of the iceberg, and I was like, okay, I could understand that. Something big and threatening in space is saying, do not interfere with human history. Okay, this makes sense, and as we learn about the Celestials, who they are, the kind of power they have, because, I'm not a huge Marvel Comics person. I haven't read a lot of these comics, so I'm going into this cold. I know nothing about the Eternals, so all of this stuff I'm learning for the very first time through the movie. So learning about the Celestials and who and what they are was interesting. Learning about the Eternals, who and what they are, I found that kind of interesting. So it was interesting to get into that. And so then they get beyond the tip of the iceberg, explaining why they really have not interfered too much in human history. And I do say that word too much because the other thing I found interesting is how they're like the inspiration of Greek mythology. Like a lot of those heroes of old are based off of them. And I feel like they did a pretty good job showing those archetypes in each of these characters and how those stories could have evolved off of those characters, because here they are trying to get rid of the deviants. That's the only place where they are allowed to interfere. So you see at the beginning of human history and at different stages as they're fighting deviants, and therefore it creates these legends. And so That for me, because I do like mythology and I like getting into that kind of stuff. So for me, that was kind of an interesting take. And it was interesting because, you know, they're following the present day timeline, but when we meet a new Eternal or something, it would jump back into the past. And so we would see kind of what they were like in the past as they were fighting deviants in their golden years, and then maybe why they are the way they are now. And so it would like jump into the past and show us these things. And overall, I don't know, it was fun to get into the past. Like one of the characters I attached to was Gilgamesh. Of the epic story of Gilgamesh, you see, is based off this character Gilgamesh. So things like that I thought were fun, I thought were interesting, and I enjoyed seeing how these characters were, these mythological characters of old, and then kind of learning the MCU truth of who these characters really are. So it was interesting to go back and see that. Now, this also leads into one of the problems with this movie. You're introducing 10 characters. I mean, even with the Avengers, that was a lot of characters, but they had their individual films. You already knew their backstories, their origins. You've already been familiar with their personalities, and now it's just fun to see these personalities mesh. With this, you don't quite have that. You have this team that started off together as a team. They have now separated, and so now that the world is in danger again, it's about bringing that team back together. And so there were certain characters I just wanted to know more about, like Angelina Jolie's Thena. I did find her character kind of interesting, and that character was dealing with a pretty big issue, but because there's 10 characters and it was spread apart, it just felt like we dipped into the shallow end of what Thena is dealing with, the shallow end of what Thena is going through. We had Robb Stark and Jon Snow from frickin' Game of Thrones in here. I would think you'd want to capitalize on that. They didn't. So, I don't know. It was just kind of weird and interesting to me. Like, I would like to have gotten Jon Snow's character a little bit more in this film. Gotten to know him just a little bit better. It would have made certain other things that happen in this film with his character have a bit more impact. So, there's things like that that are going through my head where it's like, okay, so you spread this thin by having us introduced to 10 characters. And one of the things is you have Cersei, is that her name? Again, I'm thinking Game of Thrones. Anyway, she has this particular power set, and she uses this power on a bad guy, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then later I find out, like, she shouldn't have been able to do that. And I'm going, what? What do you mean she shouldn't have been able to do that? Didn't they establish this? But then it's like, oh, okay, so I guess she can't do it on certain creatures? I don't know. So because you have these 10 characters, and it's spread out, like, these characters have interesting things, and you can tell some of these characters have interesting arcs that they're going through, but it just feels like we're hitting the shallow end of it because there's just so many characters. And then when it comes to the post-credit scenes, because come on, it's the MCU, you know it's got at least 2 post-credit scenes, and it does. The mid-credit scene and then the final scene, setting up what's coming up later in the MCU, they were okay. I mean, again, we're getting to this point where the MCU is getting a little bit weirder, a little bit more ethereal, right? And so the post-credit scenes, I just kind of went, I don't quite get this. The mid-credit scene, I looked up, did some research on. It was all right. It was still incredibly weird, but it does hold a lot of promise. And when I did a little bit of research into that, I was like, okay, that could be really interesting. The final post-credit scene, like the real actual post-credit scene, that was the weird one. And I feel like they wanted to make it mysterious and hook you and make you go, what was that? Instead, I went, what was that? That was kind of my reaction as I was watching it. And then I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, I'm only like 30% interested in the direction you're taking that. Because when I looked it up, it's all like the Marvel comics and what they do with what they were trying to set up there. I was like, oh, that's okay. I mean, that's not super exciting to me, but I don't know. I could be wrong. Honestly, the MCU has earned the right to take my money. So I am looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with it, but those were just my initial impressions and reactions to those things that I saw, especially since I'm coming into this cold. And as somebody coming into this cold and seeing especially that second post-credit scene, it was like, huh. But what did you think? Am I off base on that at all? I gave it a C+. Would you go higher or would you go lower? Let's talk about that in the comments. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit that bell by the subscribe button so you're notified when I drop my MCU ranking, because you know I'm going to be doing one. At present, I have no idea where I'm going to rank Eternals at all. So can't wait for that myself. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you're notified when that drops, and check out my other MCU videos on this channel. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.